Welcome to Heartbreak Chronicles. Aaron stood in the doorway of the maternity ward of a general hospital in the Midwest, the air smelling of disinfectant and a strange, almost sweet, floral mix. His hands were still trembling uncontrollably, and a dull ache came from his jaws as they clenched together. He was an experienced piping system designer, used to dealing with intricate blueprints and high-pressure engineering projects, but the sight before him made him feel as if the entire structure of the world was collapsing. Inside the hospital room, Ashley, his wife of 6 years, is half lying in bed. She didn't look like a woman who had just gone through labor, but rather like a model getting ready for a magazine cover shoot. Her hair was carefully groomed, her skin had a healthy glow, and she was wearing a softly textured pink robe. She had a swaddled baby in her arms and an almost contented smile with an imperceptible hint of complacency on her face. The smile was like a fine needle, piercing Aaron's heart with precision. Seeing Aaron, Ashley looked up with a natural expression as if nothing had happened between them. "There you are," she said in a tone so soft as to be almost sweet, without the slightest trace of guilt or uneasiness in her voice. "Will you take me to Matthew? I want him to see this child he has created." Each word was like a bullet through Aaron's last line of defense. A child he created? Aaron's voice was low and raspy, almost squeezed through his teeth. He repeated, "Not we, not you and I, not our, but his." He didn't immediately snap, but just walked slowly into the hospital room, his footsteps unusually calm, even with an ominous calmness. A young nurse saw him and had one of those standard "congratulations on being a father" professional smiles on her face. Aaron wanted to let out a laugh, to scream at the absurdity of it all, to grab the glass of water on the nightstand and slam it into the wall so hard that the shards splattered in all directions, as he was feeling at the moment. But he didn't. His gaze crossed over to the nurse and locked firmly on Ashley's once loving eyes, which at the moment held nothing but a sickening calmness he'd never seen before. His eyes fell on a document neatly laid out on a tray beside the bed, the newborn's birth certificate. He reached out his hand, with slow but firm movements, and took the piece of paper. As Ashley watched in shock, the moment her father jerked to his feet in the corner, Aaron's hands exerted themselves and tore the document, a symbol of lies and betrayal, in half. The crisp, ripping sound stung in the quiet hospital room. Then he folded the paper in half, ripped it again, folded it again, and ripped it again. Shreds of paper fluttered down to the polished floor like lifeless butterflies, like the ashes of their marriage. "Are you crazy?" Ashley's father, a lanky, short-tempered ex-truck driver, catapulted from his chair in the corner like an ignited cannonball and roared at Aaron. Aaron ignored him completely, his eyes still dead set on Ashley, whose face had gone from glowing a moment ago to deathly white. "If it's not my child," his voice was cold as ice, "it's not my problem." Then he turned and pulled another folder from the drawer of his nightstand, containing bills for his prepaid hospital birth and hospitalization. Without looking, he exerted himself once more, tearing those thick sheets of paper to shreds as well, and then, from the torn pieces, carefully drew out the check he'd signed earlier, folded it carefully, and tucked it back into his jacket pocket. It was as if a pause button had been pressed on the entire ward. Ashley was dumbstruck, her mouth slightly open, the smile on her face cracking completely before peeling off like a bad mask. Her father was halfway through his dash when he stopped in his tracks, startled by the sudden turn of events. The nurse's mouth dropped open, at a loss for words. "Aaron, what are you doing?" Ashley finally found her voice, but it was shrill and hoarse with shock and disbelief. Aaron took a step forward, closing in on sickbay. Ashley's father again tries to step forward and grab his arm, only to have Aaron violently shrug it off. "Fuck off," Aaron growled lowly, his voice not loud, but carrying an undeniable intimidation. He leaned down until his lips were almost against Ashley's ear and whispered, word for word, at a volume only the two of them could hear. "You slept with that muscle-bound gym alpha male, and now you expect me to raise his seed?" Ashley's face turned pale for an instant, then a blush of shame surfaced, blotched, and finally turned a deep red. In front of her father, the nurses, and the seemingly omnipresent God, she could no longer control herself and burst into a loud, violent cry. But Aaron's heart was empty. There was no pity, no sadness, Not even the burning sensation of anger, only a cold, unprecedented clarity. Turn back the clock 8 months to the beginning when everything started to fall apart. At the time, Aaron was busy with his thriving plumbing design business, often working late into the night, thinking he was fighting for their future together. And Ashley, an account executive at a small advertising agency, starts coming home later and later. At first, it was only occasionally past midnight. Then it became 1 a.m. and even closer to 2 a.m. The book club ended late. She would say softly, her eyes not looking at him, "Stacy's out of love again. Spent a lot of time talking with her." She would sigh and look a little tired. Went out for non-alcoholic cocktails with the ladies and relaxed. She would explain as she took off her shoes. Aaron chose to believe. He is busy with work and also feels that Ashley needs her own social space and time to relax. He's ridiculously stupid. Gradually, he noticed some subtle changes. Ashley began experimenting with new makeup looks that were more sophisticated and sometimes even a little sultry. She bought some sexy lingerie he'd never seen before. She began spraying frequently with a citrus vanilla blend, a scent that Aaron had once made it clear she didn't like, but which she now used every day like an addiction. And then there was her cell phone, the latest model of smartphone that became part of her body, always clutched in her hand or placed screen-side down on her desk, notifications always muted. Once, when Aaron came home early in the evening and walked into the kitchen, Ashley jumped up like a startled rabbit and fumbled to shove her phone into her back pants pocket. A flurry of panic sweeping across her face like a teenager caught sneaking a message. It's not that Aaron doesn't notice. He's just blinded by his own blind trust and avoidance of conflict. Or rather, he's subconsciously afraid to face that possible truth. Until that night, which completely shattered all his self-defeating illusions. That night, Aaron's boss canceled a late-night meeting at short notice, and he got home a few hours earlier than expected, around 7:30 p.m. He opened the door to his house, which was dimly lit and unusually quiet, so quiet it was alarming. Then he heard Ashley's voice, coming from the second floor, soft, breathy, and with a delightful, heartfelt laugh he hadn't heard in a long time. Like a ghost, he followed the sound silently up the stairs. The voice came from the nursery, the room they had so carefully decorated together, so full of anticipation. Ashley is sitting in that old rocking chair with her back to the door, holding her cell phone up to her ear and whispering in an almost dreamy tone, "Do you think she'll have your dimples? Your dimples, not ours." At that moment, Aaron felt something inside of him completely shatter with a silent thud. Not anger, but a deeper, icy despair. He didn't rush in and question, didn't break the false coziness. Like a walking corpse, he turned and went down the stairs and back to his car. He sat in the car for a full 90 minutes, his hands clenching the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles were white from overexertion, and his palms were choked with deep impressions of blood oozing from the grain of the steering wheel. When he walked in the door again, he pretended to have just gotten off work. Ashley saw him, and a familiar, gentle smile immediately bloomed on her face as she welcomed him home. But Aaron knew that those lips, which had just been flirting with another man on the phone, might still hold someone else's warmth. He should have turned away at that very moment and ended it all once and for all. But he didn't. A complex mix of emotions, a mixture of resentment, a desire for revenge, and a lingering, pathetic glimmer of hope, made him choose to wait. He waited for the baby to be born, for a showdown, and even absurdly waited for the possibility that Ashley might get a clear conscience and come clean. But she never did. Until today, in this hospital room filled with the smell of disinfectant, she used that rightful, queenly gesture to ask him, like a humble driver, to drive her and her trophies to meet the real father. When Aaron tore up the documents and coldly said, "It's not my child, it's not my problem," when he ignored his father-in-law's shouting and shoving, and just gazed at the tearful woman on the bed with his cold eyes, he knew that a part of his heart had completely died, and the other part, like a dormant beast, was finally awakening. Beast, finally awakened. "You want to live the life of a queen?" Aaron's voice wasn't high, but it carried clearly throughout the depressing hospital room. "Yes. But don't try to wear my crown." The nurse screamed and pressed the call bell for security. Ashley was still crying, clutching the baby in her arms as if it were her only shield. Her father was shaking with anger, but seemed to be deterred from stepping forward by a certain aura of determination that emanated from Aaron. Aaron took one last look at Ashley, and there was nothing left in those eyes, only desolation. Then he turned, head held high, and strutted out of the hospital room, out of this place of lies and betrayal, before the security guards could get there, without looking back. He knew that this was just the beginning. His vengeance is just kicking off. What comes next will be more than anyone could have expected. He's not going to be the background actor who suffers in silence anymore. He's going to direct the ending of the play himself. After leaving the hospital, Aaron didn't go home. The place he once considered a haven now only suffocated him. He drove aimlessly for hours through the city's maze of streets and highways connecting the suburbs. Irrelevant pop songs played on the radio, and neon lights flickered strangely outside the window, reflecting his expressionless face. He replayed the scene in the hospital over and over again in his mind. The contented and slightly provocative look on Ashley's face, the way she held the baby that wasn't his, and her glib but wordy plea dash, "Will you take me to Matthew?" The feeling of being utterly used and humiliated wrapped around his heart like poison ivy, tightening and tightening. Shameless. Fucking arrogance. Around 3 a.m., he found a rundown, cheap-looking motel off a New Jersey highway. The room smelled like a mixture of mold and poor-quality cleaners. He threw himself down on the creaky bed, his eyes staring blankly at the cobwebby cracks in the ceiling until the dawn broke. During his short, intermittent sleep, Ashley's voice on the phone from the nursery kept echoing in his ears. "Do you think she'll have your dimples?" That one sentence, like a chronic poison, permeated all the memories of the last 6 years of his marriage. The pictures of their honeymoon in Maui, those footprints and giggles on the beach, the night they danced awkwardly in their own kitchen until 1 in the morning. When he thought it was the romance of an ordinary life, even the moment they exchanged vows on their wedding day. All of it was tainted by those cold words, becoming false and cheap, like a carefully choreographed smoke show. By the time the first rays of the morning sun shone into the room through the dirty cracks in the curtains, the anger in Aaron's heart had cooled, solidified, and turned into something hard and sharp. He no longer felt numb or in pain, but unusually awake and focused. He needed answers, he needed proof. Not for a court of law, not to garner sympathy, but simply for himself, to confirm the depth and breadth of this betrayal. Around 9 a.m., he drove back to the place he used to call home. The house is empty, and Ashley will be in the hospital for at least 2 more days. Without a moment's hesitation, he walked straight to the master bedroom and to Ashley's closet. In the bottom leftmost corner of the check room, there is a locked drawer. Ashley always keeps what she calls personal mementos locked away, old journals, cards from high school friends, and so on. At least that's what she used to tell him. Aaron got a crowbar from the garage and had no trouble picking the flimsy lock. There wasn't much in the drawer, just a small, leather-bound notebook and a black flash drive. He picked up his notebook and flipped it open. It was densely packed with dates and places, as well as heart-shaped symbols and initials drawn in red ink. M. Red Heart A. Third time in the studio, so intense. And he's spending the day at the beach. Aaron thought I was at my mom's house. Page after page, a full record of lies and betrayal. Not just in recent months, but some records even go back a few years. This isn't just cheating, this is a well-managed double life. Ashley lives like she's in a spy movie, and he's the fool who's kept in the dark. Aaron felt a wave of revulsion, but he forced himself to keep reading. Then he inserted that flash drive into his laptop. A folder popped up on the computer screen containing dozens of video files, one of which was labeled Leg Day Fire. Against the last bit of his deepest reluctance to face it, Aaron, with a trembling hand, clicked on one of the videos. The screen lit up, and there was Ashley in the picture, wearing the expensive athletic tights that Aaron had given her for Christmas last year. She is bending over with her back to the camera and appears to be doing a fitness move. In front of her stood a sweaty, smiling man with an exaggeratedly muscular body Aaron recognized instantly. Matthew, the fitness instructor, the man who coached Ashley through her self-restraint workouts on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Matthew, the trainer, the man who coached Ashley through this self-discipline on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and Aaron, who was paying the high gym bill for it all. The video cuts out before things get even more unpleasant, but it doesn't matter anymore. Ashley's silvery laughter, the way she touched Matthew's arm without realizing it, the kiss she planted on his cheek at the end of the video when she darted up on her tiptoes when she thought no one was looking. It all burned like a branding iron on Aaron's retinas. He slammed his laptop shut and sat in dead silence for a long time. Then he got up, packing only a small duffel bag with a few essentials. Everything else, the house, the furniture, the false memories he left behind. Leave Ashley to rot and stink in this fortress of lies she'd built with her own hands. He didn't care. But he didn't leave the city. Oh no, he chose to stay in the neighborhood. Because he's not finished. Ashley thought she was playing it smart, thought she could easily maneuver between him and Matthew, having the safety net he provided while enjoying the excitement Matthew brought. But she was wrong. He'd been silent for too long, kind for too long, and fucking forgiving for too long. That afternoon, Aaron made an appointment with an attorney experienced in divorce cases. He calmly recounted everything, showing the notebook full of betrayal, describing the contents of the video, which the lawyer advised against submitting as direct evidence for the time being, but whose very existence was already a huge bargaining chip, and the copy of the birth certificate, which he had torn up and pieced back together. You absolutely cannot support that child, the attorney said decisively, with a professional coldness in his tone, and with this evidence. We can make sure that you keep the vast majority of the assets that were your personal contribution before and during the marriage. Guaranteed. Very good. It was the first time in weeks that Aaron had felt a faint, almost cruel, hint of peace. But it's not peace he seeks. He wants the truth to come to light once and for all, and for the betrayer to pay the price he deserves. Ashley will soon get more of the truth than she ever thought possible. Because, the day she is discharged from the hospital, he will be there waiting for her with divorce papers, legal documents relinquishing paternity, and a smile colder than the cold hospital floor. She definitely didn't anticipate it. And Matthew? Aaron also has a surprise for him. He wasn't going to make it easy for the pair to turn the page. The day Ashley was released from the hospital, Aaron made sure he was there on time. But instead of walking into the hospital building, he parked in a slightly farther spot in the parking lot, just far enough to avoid the nurses who might know him, and close enough for Ashley to see him clearly the moment she stepped out the door. Sure enough, as Ashley walked out of the hospital doors surrounded by her family in that soft pink robe with the baby wrapped in blue swaddling clothes in her arms, his baby Aaron slowly rolled down his window and even waved at her with a wave, an inscrutable, almost mocking smile on his face. Ashley visibly froze when she saw him, like she'd seen a ghost in the middle of the day, her face a mixture of shock, fear, and a hint of imperceptible panic. Her father was also nearby, carrying a huge mommy bag and muttering something under his breath. He saw Aaron's car and immediately cursed a foul word, his eyes glaring menacingly. Ashley looked down at the baby in her arms and then back up at Aaron with complicated eyes. Aaron pushed open the car door, a vellum envelope in his hand, and walked nonchalantly over to him. Ashley subconsciously walked toward him as well, her steps hesitant and cautious. Aaron, what are you doing here? She tried to squeeze out a smile, as if the torn confrontation in the hospital room a few days ago had never happened. Aaron didn't say anything, just handed her the craft envelope in his hand. Ashley hesitated, but picked it up. What is it? She asked, her voice shaking a little. Your next chapter. Aaron's tone was flat. Ashley opened the envelope suspiciously and drew out the papers inside. Her eyes quickly scanned the title of the first page, then the contents of the second. Her fingers began to tremble violently. Divorce? Her voice cracked with shock. You're divorcing me? Yes, Aaron confirmed with a nod. A complete dissolution of all relationships, assets, real estate, bank accounts. And, he paused, his gaze sweeping over the quiet baby in her arms, a paternity waiver. I'm not paying a dime for that kid. He pointed to the tiny being wrapped in blue swaddling clothes. Ashley's face instantly lost all blood color, shifting from shock to disbelief and finally to fury. You can't just. It. Aaron took a step forward, his voice lowered but filled with icy determination. I can, and I've done it. I'm in control, Ashley. That notebook, those videos, all the dates, the text message logs. You think I don't know? You think I can't feel it? Every time you lie to my face. Ashley's father seemed to want to interject, but was stopped by a stern look from Aaron. "This is between me and her," Aaron said coldly. Ashley's bottom lip began to quiver as tears welled up in her eyes. You? You choose to do this now? After I just had a baby? Perfect timing." Aaron's tone was devoid of warmth. "The mask is off. There's no point in pretending." Ashley let out a snort that bordered on a choked laugh. "And what's that count for what we once had? Aaron, what are those years we spent together?" "You mean?" Aaron's mouth curved in a cruel curve. "All those years I paid for your gym membership so you could have time to sneak out and play house with Matthew?" The words were like a heavy hammer, completely shattering Ashley's last mental defenses. She knew that he knew everything. For once, she was speechless, with no excuse to argue. But Aaron wasn't done. He leaned in close to her again, the coldness in his eyes almost searing. "And here comes the best part," he said in a near-whispering voice. "I talked to his wife." Ashley's jaw snapped off and her eyes went wide as brass bells. "What?" "Yes," Aaron said with a hint of vengeful pleasure in his voice. "It turns out Matthew was married a long time ago, have 2 kids in Ohio, and live a wonderful middle-class suburban life. Until I sent her those videos, the text message logs, and the highlights of your love notes book." Ashley froze in place as if she'd been immobilized, her mouth slightly open, her brain seemingly unable to process the barrage of blows and betrayals. "Don't worry," Aaron added, his tone relaxed and almost cruel. "She's flying in next week. She said she would love to meet the woman who destroyed her family." Ashley's knees seemed to go weak for a moment, and she subconsciously grabbed the handrail of the stroller to steady herself. Let her feel the weakness, Aaron's mind thought. Let her have a taste of that too. "You're a devil." Ashley finally squeezed the words through her teeth, her voice hoarse and desperate. "No, Ashley," Aaron said softly, his voice like cold silk sliding over skin. "I'm just a mirror. What you see now is what you really look like yourself." Ashley's father finally couldn't resist charging up, grimacing. You're going to pay for this." Aaron looked at him calmly, his eyes ancient. "I already paid for it. Paid for 6 whole years. Now I pay up." With those words, Aaron stopped looking at them, turned back to his car, started the engine, and left in a cloud of dust. In the rearview mirror, Ashley leaned limply against the stroller as her father stormed off to the side, but none of it mattered to him anymore. However, the story doesn't end there. That night, Aaron received a text message from an unfamiliar number. "You're her husband, aren't you? We need to talk. He ruined my life, too. It's Matthew's wife, Claire, and what she's about to say next will change the course of this game of revenge forever." The sender is Claire, Matthew's wife, who lives far away in Ohio. Before Aaron could reply, a second text followed. "I saw those videos. Thanks for sending it to me. He kept saying he was staying out late at night for extra practice." I guess that was part of the lie. Aaron stared at the screen of his cell phone for a long moment, unsure of how to respond. Talking to another victim of this farce feels strangely like discovering that the monster that's been hiding under your bed turns out to be haunting the next-door neighbor as well. An absurd, homoerotic feeling creeps in. He eventually replied, "He got my wife pregnant. I found it in the hospital the day she gave birth." The typing bubble on the other side immediately popped up, showing that she was typing rapidly. "He told me they broke off contact months ago." It seems that was a lie, too. Aaron wasn't sure what reaction he expected from her. Bitterness? Anger? Or silence? But surprisingly, Claire asked, "Can I give you a call?" Aaron hesitated, then returned the word, "Good. Give me 10 minutes." He took a can of beer out of the refrigerator and walked over to the narrow back balcony of his apartment and sat down. It was drizzling outside, the kind of fine, drizzly rain that is supposed to bring tranquility. But there was no peace to be found in his chest, only the cold, tight knot left by betrayal. The phone rings. It's Claire. Her voice sounded tired, with a warm quality, but with a sharpness that could not be ignored. "I'm sorry you're going through this," Claire spoke up, her voice smooth. "I wouldn't wish this on anyone." "You too," Aaron replied briefly. "When did you find out?" "A few months ago. Overheard a message pop up on his Apple Watch." Claire's voice paused as if recalling the details of the moment, saw the name Ash and a heart emoji. "He said it was just a customer who was particularly enthusiastic about him." I was trying to believe him." Her voice cracked for a moment, but quickly regained its stability. "But something in my gut tells me something's not right." "Yeah." Aaron mumbled in a low voice. That gut feeling. We always ignore it until it's too late. You said your wife is pregnant? Claire's voice became clearer. The due date happens to coincide highly with what they call training time. Yes. And now she wants me to raise that baby, like some kind of consolation prize. Aaron's tone was full of sarcasm. Claire took a heavy breath, then exhaled slowly. Oh my God. These two. A silence fell on both ends of the phone. Two people in different cities with different life trajectories are connected by fate because of the betrayal of the same man and the same woman, and their respective worlds have collapsed. You said you were coming over next week? Aaron broke the silence. I was going to, Claire said. But now, I think I'm going to have to come over as soon as I can. I need closure. I want to see Ashley's face for myself. Aaron's mouth curled into a bitter smile. We thought of a piece. At that very moment, a bold thought formed in his mind. What if we do it together? Aaron said slowly. You, me, and the two of them. It's in one room. No more lies, no more games. There was silence on the other end of the line for a few seconds. Then, in an unusually firm voice, Claire replied, I'm in. 2 days later, Claire flew into Aaron's city. They met at a quiet cafe in the center of town. Aaron recognized her immediately, tall, with defined cheekbones, and eyes that held an age-inappropriate look of vicissitude and pain, clearly having experienced too many unknown injuries. They sat down across a small table like two secret police officers exchanging information. She begged me not to go public, Claire whispered as she stirred the coffee in her cup, her eyes looking out the window. She told me she loved him, that there was a special connection between them, as if I was the one who was the obstacle in their true obstacle in their love story. Aaron's jaw tensed again. Ashley said something similar to me. She says she feels alive with him, as if the life we share is simply not enough for her. Claire's body leaned forward slightly, her eyes sharp. I want to see their faces when they realize it's over, not just for one of us, but for both of them. Aaron nodded heavily. A well-thought-out plan was rapidly taking shape between them. The battlefield they chose was Ashley's favorite Italian restaurant. Ashley assumed that Aaron had asked her out to have a calm talk, perhaps to discuss the details of the divorce, or even to seek some kind of turnaround. Matthew, on the other hand, thinks that Claire has forgiven him and wants to meet privately to give him a chance to explain and redeem himself. Neither of them knew that the other would show up as well, much less that an elaborate trial awaited them. Aaron and Claire had reserved in advance a relatively private room in the back of the restaurant. As Ashley and Matthew walked into the restaurant arm in arm with easy and even somewhat sweet smiles on their faces and were guided by the waiter towards that private room. The smiles on their faces froze the moment they pushed the door open. In the booth, Aaron and Claire were sitting side by side at a table, watching them calmly. No angry accusations, no hysterical questioning. Claire didn't even speak, and neither did Aaron. They just watched in silence, watching how the two faces that had once made their hearts flutter or ache, shattered inch by inch in shock, panic, and fear, like shattered glass. Matthew's hand subconsciously slipped from Ashley's waist. Ashley jerked back a step like she'd seen a ghost, her face white. Finally, Claire slowly stood up. Her body was shaking slightly with emotion, but her voice was unusually calm. So, she said, her eyes darting between Ashley and Matthew. Who wants to explain first? The silence that followed was so heavy that you could almost hear the air freeze. The faint sounds of clashing knives and forks and murmurs from outside the restaurant's booths seemed distant at the moment. The storm, it hasn't even really started yet. Ashley's face contorted into an expression Aaron had never seen before, one that was raw, panicked, and completely out of her usual carefully disguised script. She looked at Aaron, then at Claire, and finally her gaze shot like a sharp arrow to Matthew beside her. You told me she had moved out. Ashley growled down at Matthew, her voice suppressed but filled with venomous resentment. Matthew opened his mouth, but couldn't get a word out. His lips opened and closed noiselessly, his eyes wide, like a man who suddenly realizes that the rope he's been climbing is actually a noose. Claire didn't flinch. She stepped forward and threw an envelope, also of craft paper, onto the table in front of them with a snap. Bank records, she said in a flat, waveless tone, hotel receipts, text message backups, and security footage from our garage. You two are disgusting. Ashley glanced at the envelope in horror, as if it contained a bomb. I, I didn't mean to. It didn't happen this way. She tried to argue, her voice weak and powerless. Aaron let out a loud, unabashed scoff. The laughter made the diners outside the booth look over curiously, but he didn't care. You didn't mean what? His voice rose steeply, filled with long-suppressed anger. Didn't mean for me to hear you at the hospital asking to introduce your bastard son to that gym concubine of yours? Not intentionally treating me like a spare tire, enjoying everything I have to offer while playing house behind my back with a drugged-out muscle man. Although Aaron knows Matthew probably isn't using contraband, he just wants to attack with the meanest possible words at the moment. Matthew finally finds his voice and tries to defend himself. Look, man, I didn't know she was married in the first place. Shut up. Aaron interrupted him gruffly. You've been to my house. You helped me move that treadmill into the basement. And I bought you a beer. Don't fucking tell me you don't know. Ashley also turned sharply to Aaron, a desperate plea in her voice. Aaron, please. I know I screwed up, but we can fix it. I just had a baby. I'm hormonally imbalanced. I'm not thinking straight. Claire let out a dry, bitter sneer. Oh no, dear. Her voice was icy. You've been thinking clearly for those last 9 months or so. Ashley turned to Claire again, trying to seek some sort of inter-female understanding or sympathy. You don't understand. He said he would leave you. He said he wanted to be with me. Matthew's eyes instantly widened with panic and anger. What? No, I didn't. I told you I'm trying to work out our issues with Claire. The booth was once again dead silent. This time, Ashley looks like she's going to crumble and fall at any moment. Just then, Aaron spoke up, his voice calm, but with an undertone of final judgment. That kid. Good luck getting Matthew's name on the birth certificate. I have had my attorney file a legal declaration of paternity waiver. You don't ever get a dime of child support from me. Ashley blinked blankly, seemingly unable to comprehend the meaning of the words. You can't do that. An icy smile appeared on Claire's face. He already did. You ruined my life. Ashley finally breaks down and screams, tears running out of her eyes uncontrollably. No. Aaron slowly stood up and looked at her condescendingly. You did this to yourself. With lie after lie, betrayal after betrayal. You've personally turned our marriage into a garbage incinerator and expect me to fan the flames for you. Claire stood up as well and turned to Matthew. Matthew, we're done. I have contacted an attorney in Ohio. I'll take the kids and the house and leave. You'd better pray that you can secure weekend visitation at a motel somewhere. Matthew's face was as white as paper. I made a mistake. He mumbled, his voice weak. No. Claire's voice was cold and determined. You made a choice. The silence that followed was the sound of two people watching their carefully constructed false world burn away in the flames of reality. Ashley dropped limply into a chair, losing her voice. Matthew, on the other hand, stood there like a soulless puppet with his hands on his head, as if he were trying to force time back. Aaron looked over at Claire. In that moment, he saw in her eyes, and deep within himself, a glimmer of hijacked, resilient strength. They looked at each other without needing to say anything. Then, together, the two turned around and walked out of that dramatic conflict-filled booth and out of that restaurant without looking back. They've seen enough. Outside, the rain has stopped. The air was crisp and fresh, with a moist scent from the rain. Claire exhaled slowly, as if to expel all the turbid air from her chest. You know what the worst part is? She said softly, her eyes unfocused ahead. Aaron shook his head. They didn't even say I'm sorry. Claire's voice was soft, but carried a heavy weight. Somehow, that simple statement made the whole thing feel more real and more icy. But they weren't broken. No, absolutely not. They're only just starting out, from the ashes, all over again. After leaving the restaurant, Aaron and Claire didn't immediately go their separate ways. They sat in Aaron's car, parked on the curb outside the restaurant for nearly half an hour. The air in the car was still sticky with the acrid odor left by betrayal, but neither man spoke. It seemed that all that needed to be said had been exhausted in that depressing booth just now. I had thought I would feel better. Claire finally spoke, her voice low, her eyes vacant as she stared out the windshield at the wet street. Yeah, Aaron responded. Me too. Both men let out a short, dry laugh that sounded less like pleasure and more like the exhausted breath expelled from two broken hearts. To be honest with you, Claire turned her head and looked at Aaron. I feel like I lost a war that lasted 10 years, and I didn't even know I was in the middle of it. I felt like I was playing the whole game on the wrong team. Aaron responded, a hint of self-deprecation in his voice. That's the terrible thing about betrayal. No one ever tells you that. It doesn't just hurt, it disorients you. You'll start to question everything, every memory, every laugh, every night you thought the years were going by. That night, Aaron's cell phone received 7 messages from Ashley. Number 1, we need to talk. Number 2, I'm sorry. The third entry was a picture of a baby, that innocent little face at the moment, but like a silent accusation and kidnapping. The remaining ones are a mix of various versions of guilt, manipulation, and despair. Aaron didn't reply to a single one. He just poured himself a glass of whiskey, sat down on the empty living room couch, and started looking through old photos on his phone. A picture of them together on vacation with big smiles and blue skies and blue seas in the background. All seem like ironic lies now. The life he spent years building is nothing more than a backup option for another person who can discard it at any time. Immediately after that, texts from some mutual friends started pouring in. Hey, man, what the hell happened? Ashley said you went crazy in the hospital. I heard you and a woman ambushed her and met at the diner. Seriously, Aaron likewise chose to ignore it. It's always easy for people to take sides, especially when they only hear one side of the story. This is another trick of the cheater. Not only do they betray you, they try to manipulate public opinion, play the victim, and garner sympathy. Aaron wasn't going to go along with her performance. The next day, he received a sternly worded cease and desist letter from Matthew's attorney, demanding that he stop disseminating defamatory material. Aaron couldn't help but laugh out loud when he read it. That coward and trying to shut him up? He immediately called his attorney. Can I respond with a smile? He asked. Sure. The lawyer's tone was relaxed, plus a counterclaim threat. They promptly filed a claim for emotional distress damages with evidence that Ashley's dissemination of false information had caused him reputational harm. At the same time, Aaron authorized Claire to use all the evidence he had about Ashley and Matthew's inappropriate relationship in her divorce proceedings. 2 days later, Matthew's attorney quietly withdrew the cease and desist letter. Claire was literally smiling when she called Aaron to tell him the news. He's scared, she said, real scared. He deserved it. Aaron replied, because he's no longer the fool who a week ago naively believed in communication and fixing. He's experienced the brutality of the truth firsthand, and he's been changed forever. Aaron changed his cell phone number, blacked out Ashley on all social media platforms, froze all joint accounts, and cut off all avenues by which she could reach him and try to manipulate him. Ashley obviously can't accept this complete isolation. A few days later, she showed up at the door of Aaron's apartment with her baby in her arms. She looked haggard, with dark circles under her eyes and tear-stained face. Aaron, she begged with a choked voice as she knocked on the door. Please, just give me 5 minutes, just 5 minutes. Aaron opened the door, but stepped out himself, then closed it behind him, cutting her off from the boy. I gave you 6 years, Ashley. His voice was awfully calm. And you spent every minute of it lying to me. Ashley looked tired and hollow, her eyes no longer proud or calculating in the way they once had been, only a pure fear, a fear of losing the lifestyle she had taken for granted, a fear of losing control. You don't understand, she said incoherently. Matt left me. He said the pressure was too much. Aaron looked at her with an expressionless face, nothing rippling inside. Are you saying that the man who made a child with you doesn't want to raise him now either? Speechless, Ashley just wiped her tears with the back of her hand and looked around with desperate eyes, as if expecting someone to swoop in and save her like in the movies. But no one. This time, there are no heroes and no saviors. You ruined my life. She said the words again, resentment in her voice. No. Aaron took a step back and reopened the door, ready to return to his safe space. You're just, finally, starting to live the life you chose for yourself. He closed the door and turned the lock. Ashley's suppressed sobs came from outside the door, followed by the sound of fading footsteps. Aaron leaned his back against the cold wooden door, his forehead resting against the panel, and listened quietly. A strange sense of calm enveloped him as the sounds outside the door faded completely. Not joy or relief, more like the dust finally settling after a violent blast. He could clearly see the broken bricks and tiles all over the floor. That was his life once. Yes, life as he knew it was over. But for some reason, for the first time, this realization didn't scare him. Over the next few weeks, Aaron began cleaning out the house. It wasn't just a literal purge. He threw out all the framed group photos, all the scented candles Ashley had left behind, all those little notes with sweet lies written on them. It was an emotional one. Piece by piece, he began to put himself back together from the rubble. The process was not easy. Sometimes he'd find an earring she'd left behind deep in the carpet, or see a pregnancy guide she'd read on a bookshelf with a post-it note she'd written in her elegant handwriting. Looking forward to the day he kicks me. Each discovery was like a dull knife slowly cutting into his heart, because he had believed those notes, believed every word she had written. But that's all a lie. He and Claire occasionally texted each other, like two veterans who had survived the same battle, to keep each other informed of their injuries and the progress of their reconstruction. There is no ambiguity, no excess emotion, just a strange camaraderie based on shared experience. One morning, Claire sent a message that touched Aaron deeply. The most painful part isn't losing them. It's realizing that the person you thought you were never really existed. Aaron stared at the message for a long time. Yes, that's exactly the truth. The Ashley he'd loved and trusted was just a figment of his imagination. And after all this, he, himself, was no longer the same Aaron. One weekend evening, Aaron sat alone on his back deck, sipping a beer and watching the setting sun color the sky an intense orange red. That's when he received a message from an unexpected person. "Hey, it's Stacy. I just found out what happened. I'm really, really sorry." Stacy is Ashley's best friend, the one that Aaron has always thought was too loyal and even a little blind to Ashley. "She lied to all of us," Stacy's next message explains. "She told us you left her first, right when she was pregnant, and that you had to take a paternity test out of malice. I feel disgusted now. She's using all of us as pawns on a chessboard," Aaron replied. "And you're just one of them." Stacy asked if he was okay now. Aaron thought for a moment and replied, "It's okay. Not too well, and not completely healed, but okay." It's an honest answer. He stopped secretly checking Ashley's social media feeds and replaying the images of betrayal in his mind countless times a day. He could go a whole day without even thinking about Matthew's sickening face or that moment in the hospital that had turned his world upside down. He was able to breathe again, though sometimes there was still a choking soot in the air. Then he got a letter. Not an email, not a text message, but an actual handwritten letter in an envelope with a floral design. It's from Ashley. The letter was long, 3 pages long, filled with both front and back. She detailed how much she regretted it, saying she lost herself during her pregnancy, that Matthew wasn't the man she thought he was, and how she wished she could turn back the clock and make her choose him, Aaron, again. The letter ends with, "Even if you can't forgive me, I want you to know that you were the best part of my life." Aaron read every word carefully. Then he refolded the letterhead and put it in one of the bottom drawers of his desk without replying. Because he understands that forgiveness doesn't always need to be expressed through words. Sometimes silence is the best answer. He had said all that needed to be said. 2 weeks later, he received a text from Claire. "Divorce finalized." Signed in front of him. He cried. "I didn't." Aaron looked at the text message, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. He replied, "Proud of you. Freedom is looking good for us." Yes, freedom. It does feel good. It was the first time, after that long and agonizing storm, that he truly felt like he was not just surviving, but starting over. It was a quiet Sunday morning when Aaron finally got up the courage to step into that gym again. This is it. This is where Ashley first met Matthew. This is the place where she enjoys the private lessons that he pays for and carries out another secret training while he is working overtime in the office for their so-called future. She was enjoying the private lessons he was paying for and carrying out another secret training. He stood in front of the mirror in the locker room for a moment, examining himself in it. Something is indeed different. Not the face, at least not exactly, but the eyes. They have witnessed so much, not the smoke on the battlefield, but the betrayal of the person on the pillow, the kind of betrayal that is enough to drain a person's heart completely. And yet, he still stands. He walked into the apparatus area like a detective returning to the scene of a crime. But this time, he's not here to seek the embers of vengeance, but to proclaim his sovereignty and reclaim the peace that is his. This place, and the sordid things that happened here, should no longer control his life. He hadn't planned to meet anyone, but fate always seemed to like to arrange coincidences that were full of irony. Matthew was there alone. There was no writing pad in hand to instruct others, and the usual confident and even somewhat arrogant smile was missing from his face. He was wearing a sweaty undershirt, and his face looked terrible, like he hadn't slept well in a long time. Matthew saw Aaron immediately. Aaron had expected him to avert his gaze, but he didn't. Instead, he approached slowly, like a man at a funeral, cautiously. "Aaron," Matthew's voice was low and raspy. "Look, I know there's nothing I can say right now that's going to help, but—" "Very well," Aaron interrupted directly, his tone icy. "Then don't say anything." Matthew froze in place with his mouth open like he was choking. "I don't need your apology." Aaron pressed a step forward, his eyes sharp as knives. "I don't need what I call closure. I don't even want to hear your voice again." His eyes looked the man in front of him up and down like a scanner. "I just want you to understand that I see clearly now. Without those false masks, without those inflated egos, you're just another coward who can't keep his pants on." Matthew didn't say a word, just stood there, gulping in embarrassment at the belated, abject humiliation. "I hope you," there was no warmth in Aaron's voice, "will treat the next part of your life well. Because of this paragraph, you have burned it to ashes with your own hands." With that said, Aaron walked right past him and over to a bench press rack and began to weight the piece and get into his workout. Matthew didn't follow or try to say anything more. Over the next few months, Aaron rebuilt his life in a step-by-step fashion. It's not the dramatic phoenix rising that you see in the movies, but a more realistic, slower, piece-by-piece bonding like repairing a broken piece of china. He joined a book club, began journaling his thoughts, took a solo trip to Vermont, and was surprised to find that he actually began to enjoy that long-lost peace. He insisted on seeing a psychotherapist in an effort to deal with the anger, self-doubt, and painful flashbacks about the past that came flooding back from time to time and haunted him like a ghost. Gradually, the toxins began to drain from his system. He met new people, some genuine, kind people. He no longer socializes as a man desperate to fill an inner void, but as someone ready to start from scratch and build something better. He and Claire remained in occasional contact, sharing each other's recent news and recovery progress like comrades in arms. "Started drawing," Claire wrote in a text message at one point, "and it's a mess. But I like the chaos." Aaron, for his part, told her about the trip to Vermont, how he'd stood on the edge of a cliff and vociferously shouted out into the empty valley all the anger and pain that had been building up in his heart, and how it felt like he'd lifted a decade-long weight in a single moment. "Sounds healing," Claire replied. "You deserve this." Yeah, he's worth it. But the healing process isn't always pretty. Some nights he still wakes up in a rage, still dreams of that cold hospital room, still can't help but wonder what life would have been like if Ashley had chosen loyalty over lies. Those thoughts, however, could no longer control him. They were only occasional passers-by, and he no longer invited them to stay. One day, a year after the divorce was finalized, Aaron received a text message from an unknown number. It was short. "He's not coming to see her again." I didn't know what to tell her when she asked where Daddy had gone. "It's Ashley." Aaron stared at the text message for a long time, reading it over and over again. Then he calmly pressed the delete button. Because here's the truth. He's not her savior. He's not her backup plan. And he's not the man who deserves to pick up the pieces and raise someone else's child because she's desperate. He's free. He finally came to a deep understanding that leaving wasn't the hardest part, and that sticking around and never looking back was the real test. If there's one piece of advice Aaron can give to anyone who's reading this story, anyone who's ever been through a similar fire of purgatory, it's this: trust your gut. Keep an eye out for those tiny lies, those late-night, quietly flipping cell phone screens, those perfunctory, empty kisses. They're not just red flags, they're alarms. Don't try to mute them. And when betrayal knocks you to the ground, don't just get up. To stand up differently, stronger, freer. Because love is real, but deception is just as real. And in the end, the only thing worth holding on to is the truth. Aaron let go of her and of his past scarred self. He found his true self, a new sky of his own. That's the end of today's story. For more captivating tales, hit subscribe and never miss an episode.